That also Professor Claudia Maria Riehl. She's a professor of Germanic linguistics at the Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Munich, Germany. She's currently the chair of the German as a Foreign Language department at the university, and her research interests lie in language contact and multilingualism, specifically the didactics of multilingualism, culture specificity of texts and discourse, text linguistics, and pragmatics in minority and regional languages, as well as language attitudes. Over the last decades, she and her research team have studied and conducted linguistic interviews with speakers of Barossa German, which is a linguistic enclave, German-speaking enclave in Southern Australia. They've also worked with second language learners among refugee children in Germany and Canada, as well as with German-speaking minorities in Eastern Europe. And the title of her presentation today is Being Volga German, Historical Background, Sociolinguistic Development, and the Formation of Identity. Please join me in welcoming Professor Riehl.
Thank you so much, Mark, for this kind introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm absolutely intrigued here from this university and this beautiful atmosphere we have here, and also then a wonderful conference. I have learned a lot, and especially, I have to clip it there. Yeah, okay. I've really learned a lot in the last days. Yeah. And especially, of course, I'm really interested in fashion. So this morning was really fantastic for me. And I thought, oh God, the poor audience, after this brilliant talks about fashion and textiles and everything, now that we have to go back to linguistics, which is more boring. But hopefully, I will bring you something also interesting. Okay, I give you an overview of my talk. Doesn't work again. Why? Probably. Okay. Yes. Okay. First of all, first I will give you a very quick overview of the history of the Volga Germans, because we already heard a lot of the history of Russian Germans, and this is very similar. So, and then I will have a quick overview of the development of language, but very roughly such to give you an idea how it's like. Then I will focus on the social linguistic development, like language transmission and things. And then I will present you something that I've done on positioning and identity formation in a small group of Volga Germans we interviewed during our research in the beginning of the 20th century. And in the last part, I will give you an outlook on integration in identity formation after repatriation. So I will come back to this in a minute, what this is like. Okay, now the history, you already have seen this map because it was also in the presentation of Peter Rosenberg. And here you see where the Germans came from this region, and they came first in this Volga area. This was the first settlements. Here you can see it again with the red circle. This is this Volga region, and here you have a more detailed map where you see how many settlements had been founded in this area, and this is where the red circle is. This is Saratov. This is the main capital of the Volga area. Okay. I refer to this. You know, I have already heard that Catherine the Great released a manifest in 1763, and after that, between 1764 and 1765. 7, this was not a long period. Already 104 settlements were founded in the lower Volga area, and there were an estimated number of settlers of between 23 and 29,000. So this was quite a big area. These settlements were considered model colonies with local autonomy. That meant they had their own churches and schools and also could use German as a language of everyday use and also administration. The majority of settlers, and this had some impact, of course, on the language. The majority came from Hessen, the northern Palatinate, northern Bavaria, northern Badenia, the area around Volga. You probably can also see this on this upper map in this more west central German area. Of course, there are also settlers from other parts, but that's a majority. Okay, further development. We have already heard that the privileges and rights of autonomy had been abolished by Tsar Alexander II in 1874, which led to a migration wave to the Americas. But most of the Volga Germans stayed in the area. And in 1918, after the revolution, the German colonies along the Volga had been acknowledged as autonomous region. And later, this was upgraded to a so-called autonomous sociolinguistic Soviet Republic, the so-called Volga Republic. German became the language of administration, education. That means they had all kind of schools, primary schools, colleges, secondary schools, everything. German-speaking press and theaters and everything in this. This is important because I will refer later to our sample of speakers we interviewed, and some of them had been born during the Volga Republic, and this had an impact also on their language competence because they attended German-speaking schools, but only the very, very old. Okay, by the way, this is a flag of the Volga Republic. Yeah. Okay, yeah, changes after World War had been mentioned several times already. In 1941, all Germans in the European part of the then USSR were deported to Siberia and Central Asia. And here you have a map. I found this quite illustrative because you see in this, what we say, violet areas, the main areas where the settlers had been deported to at this. And then there was, until 1955, the so-called Kommandatura. So they had been under Russian surveillance and could not leave a special area. And also there was a ban of the German language. So it was absolutely forbidden to speak German. And after this, some Volga Germans returned to the Volga, but they were not allowed to go to their former homes because they were already taken by Russians or other people. And so they had to go to different areas. Yeah? So they could not go back and say, this was my house. No, no way. So they had to settle elsewhere, but they went back to the Volga. But unfortunately, Volga Republic was not established. We had in 1964 some partial rehabilitation of the Russian Germans. Okay, but what happened after 1999 when the Iron Curtain fell? We had this foundation of German organizations, and they were called also like this movement, Wiedergeburt, rebirth. Peter mentioned that in his, Peter mentioned this in his talk. And yeah, here I have a picture I have taken. Sorry for that. We saw so many wonderful photographs now in this conference, and these are really my old photographs taken 20 years ago with an old camera, so this is not very good, but you get an impression. And by the way, yeah, you can also see that some of the women still wear their shawls there, and their tücher. Probably we cannot see what color they have, but anyway, and these were taken in one of these clubs. So they have kind of get-togethers for senior citizenships, choirs, dancing groups, and everything organized. Also language classes. In 1996, the Russian Federation granted the right of basic education in the mother tongue. So that would be really fantastic for the Germans. But as Peter also mentioned, that there was this, what he called exodus. That means a huge number of the inhabitants of German settlements were re-immigrating to German, so-called Spätaussiedler. I will come back to them in the last part of my talk. So this was unfortunately, because there would have been the chance to revive the German language, but then the speakers had almost all gone, mainly in this area. Okay. The development. This is a funny video, YouTube video I found about there. By the way, there are a lot of YouTube videos. If you're interested on Volga German, some of them there are more serious, others not. But this is, for instance, one on the language. Okay, but my part is more serious. So unfortunately, okay. So how did the dialect develop? As I've mentioned, the majority of the settlers came from this more western central part of Germany, and they this led to a formation of a regional vernacular, so-called Volga German. This is there are of course different dialects. Every village had a different dialect, but there was also kind of more regional vernacular based on the Rhenish Palatine, the Rheinfelsisch, Hessian, and East Central German dialects. In Siberia, where they had been deported, the Volga German speakers, of course, came into contact with the majority language speakers, Russian speakers, and also speakers of other German varieties, though this resulted in a new language merger. And I will give you an example of that later. Okay, some characteristic, but very rough. Of course, the main characteristics are the phonology, so pronunciation. So you have the monophthongization of diphthongs, like they don't say Seife for soap, but Saaf. They don't say Staub for dust, but Stab. Yeah? So they always have this A in the pronunciation. And they also have this aspirantization of plosives, like they don't say gelegen, but gleiche, statt gleiche, or they say bliebe instead of geblieben, things like that. And then they have this, what's also very characteristic, this assimilation of D after nasal consonant. Instead of verstanden, they say verstanden. Things like that. And also, just mention one thing, there is the unrounding of vowels and diphthongs that we will see. This is in the example. They don't say früher, but fria, and they say as here light instead of Leute. This is very typical, but this is also in many other German dialects. So. Some morphological characteristics, they use an uniform article, like in English, that, but this is there, and they have uninflected possessive pronouns. And also an interesting thing, the characteristic vocabulary they have, and this is interesting for German speakers or for this is a very old-fashioned kind of vocabulary. They have maintained, say schwach instead of bad, or bad. What is it? Schlecht. No, I don't. And saying bang sein. What I also found interesting: Mannsleid, Weibsleid for women and men, and also something like springen, what means spring, like in English for to run, and erzählen is to like in English tell, yeah. So and there's for to speak, and so on. So we also have language contact in the lexicon. So we have a lot of loans from the Russian language for food, like varenia, pomodoro. we have for technical innovations. Of course, when those people immigrated, there were no bus or airplane. So they, of course, borrowed this expression from the Russian language. Also institutions like the hospital, that's Balnitze hospital, kindergarten, sadik, and so on, occupations. Administration also, of course, these units do not exist in the German language like oblast or rayon. And this reminds me also of the talk Götz gave yesterday, articles of daily use like sumka, there's a handbag, and Götz had the example of shemovan, what is a suitcase, and there are similar things, yeah? So I mentioned that because of when Volga Germans then immigrated to the Americas, they brought all these kind of loans with them, and sometimes they considered them German words. They did not know that they come from Russian. This is also an interesting thing. Yeah. So another influence of Russian contact in the grammar. So they omit the articles because Russian as a Slavic language does not have articles. So I have this, as I like, hast du zu Hause Bibel? That would be in English, do you have Bible at home? Without a Bible. So, yeah? And also copying word order principles. Okay, I brought you an example from a Volga German speaker. Hopefully, I have to click here probably. Should it work with this one? I don't think so. I click here. Let's try. So this is also interesting from a historical perspective, because this speaker was telling the story when they were deported from the Volga region to Siberia, and they came to one region and they asked whether they could work there. Yeah? And this is an example. Hopefully this works now. Okay, this is also an interesting example, because here this was a discussion. The председатель is the director. Somebody came, and then he said, "What kind of people are these?" And they say, "They are Germans." And then they say, "No, I don't want any Germans here because of the war and so." And then my son was taken to the front. My son was taken to the front, and so on. And then someone said, "Oh, they are not this kind of Germans. They are Russian Germans." Yeah? And this is really interesting. This discussion was going on here. And so that's why I took it. But you got, those who speak German probably had got an idea how this sounds like. I mean, yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the, sorry. Yeah, hopefully it works now again. Okay, now I come to the sociolinguistic development, and here I refer to our data. So we took interviews with 25 speakers of Volga German origin. Okay, I compared to the massive, huge number of respondents. Götz and Peter have, this is really a small community. We also took interviews with other Russian Germans, but I excluded those from this analysis. So Stefan will surely be happy, because this will be a qualitative analysis now, because of the lack of the quantity. Okay, but there were 33 generations. The first generation, 70 until 83 years old, and those were those people who still grew up during the Volga Republic, and they were able to attend primary school in German. This is the first generation. Yeah. So then the second, between 65 and 50 years old, those were born already in Siberia or from Volga German parents, and then returned to the Volga area later. And then we have only 4 speakers of the fourth generation. They were students at the university. I will come back to them later. Okay, so I give you an overview of the language competence across the generations. So I show you those before, those born before 1932 something. They still speak, or at that time of the interview, spoke Volga German dialect. They also spoke Standard German, the Standard German from this area, because they learned it at school. So, and they spoke Russian, but this is also interesting, as I wrote here, partly as an interlanguage. Some of our respondents reported that they had an accent when they spoke Russian. And that was really a funny story. One day we met a woman, and and there was a young man, a Russian-speaking man with her, who took care of her. And they told us how they met. He wanted to help her over the street or something. And then he heard her talk, and he said, "Oh my God, she reminds me of my grandmother because he has the same accent." This was a typical Volga German accent in Russian. And so they became friends, and he took care of her and things like that. So, you know, it's always good to be recognized by the accent. So this was the first generation. Then the second generation, they speak Volga German dialects, but with some markers of attrition. So we already see that they don't use the dialect anymore on a daily basis. And they speak Standard German, but some of them only rudimentary. Third generation, those also had been reported because we could not take interviews with this generation, but we were told they speak Russian and have a passive competence of the Volga German dialect. And some of them also speak Standard German as an interlanguage. That means they have learned it at school. And the same holds for the fourth generation. They speak Russian and Standard German at various levels, depending on whether they had lessons at school or not, and some of them studied the language. So, okay. Now let me talk about the language transmission. So speakers of the first generation grew up in a German-speaking environment, and as already mentioned, acquired Russian as an L2, a second language. And after the war, the Volga German families still passed on their German dialect to their children. Why? Because they told us they did not speak enough Russian to be able to transmit this language to their family, to their children. So they had to use Volga German. Also, it was forbidden, but yep, what should I do? I have to communicate with my children. The majority of our respondents reported that having used German with their children exclusively until they started school. And then, of course, we know this always happens in bilingual education. As soon as children enter school, they come home and they speak the other language and the majority language. And you have to be very consequent to maintain the heritage language at home. And so only if grandparents lived in the family did the children speak German to their grandparents. Also, but the others just stopped. And of course, if they were the Germans were married to Russian spouses, the family language was Russian. Okay. what about transmission in further generations? So born after 1935, our second generation speakers did not actively transmit German to their children because they were already brought up with Russian as a majority language. The transmission stopped at that stage. Usually only few fourth generation members picked up some Russian German elements from their grandparents. I mean, like some words for things for daily use and things like that. But they were able to acquire German as a second language later. Okay. Now I come to the positioning and identity. When I speak of positioning, I mean the way speaker either positions himself towards the heritage variety, this is in this case Volga German, or towards German as a standard language, and also the positioning towards other varieties of German spoken in the Russian German community. So what do they tell us about their own variety? All speakers, except only one speaker said, I speak Volga Deutsch. All others said, I speak Deutsch. We will see in a minute what for them Deutsch is. And they also claimed Deutsch or Deutsch to be their mother tongue and not a specific variety of the German language. But this is a very typical thing for most speakers. Only so-called standard languages are for them able to be named as a mother tongue. Dialects are normally not named as a mother tongue. Only if they are recognized as kind of languages. If we now say Plautdeutsch is a language, then they would say Plautdeutsch. But Volga German for them was a dialect. So, and I have an interesting example here from one speaker who, when I asked him, but you spoke dialect. Should I read in German and you read the English translation, or what do you prefer? Okay, no. I read the English translation, and then those who speak German can read the German. I asked him, you spoke dialect at home, and then he said, well, I've heard a lot of High German like that, not the words, but there's something like that. But what I have learned a little, now you see, very weak. And where you can put it as High German or Low German, I don't know. And he actually says Plattdeutsch, but he speaks Volga German. This was really interesting because they do not really know how to name their own variety. And probably he heard in Siberia or wherever that the Plattdeutsch is this, and this is for them is dialect. Yeah, and another speaker or some speakers also made clear that the term Hochdeutsch does not necessarily refer to Standard German, but to a variety that is close to the written standard that they acquired at school. And one of the speakers said, in former times back home, I used to speak German like it's written in the books. So that's how I am. That's how our parents were. I speak proper German. This is also this ideology of speaking proper German. And the interesting thing was the interviewer, this was not me, but this was a Russian doctoral student who studied German, was excellent in German, but he asked, Hochdeutsch können Sie sprechen? Can you speak High German? And then the speaker was really upset. Yes, of course. That's what you hear. The way we speak, that's High German. Of course, it's not High German. You see Riehl and you see all this kind of typical elements of the Volga German dialect, but for her, it was High German. So the positioning of other varieties, this was also interesting because I did some comparison with other language islands. Mark mentioned Volga, the Barossa German. I also studied Brazilian German, and compared to those, the Russian speakers had much more awareness of differences of different dialects. But of course, this was because they came in contact with different dialects and ways of speaking during the deportation. And one speaker, this is this one, he said, yeah, he was really able to name differences. He said the Volhynians came out of Brandenburg. They don't have a letter G, not a letter, but he means the sound. Huh? Letter G. They always say "je," where the letter "g" is. Ich habe sie geholt, ich habe sie gebracht, ich habe sie mitgenommen. That's how they speak. Huh? So he was really aware of the differences, and this was interesting. Okay, now I come to the identity formation in our Volga German sample. Our participants in the first and second generation called themselves Deutsche, I already mentioned that, without any modification. And interestingly, and this reaction doesn't seem to be dependent on the nationality of the interviewer. As I already mentioned before, we had Olga, this is Olga, who helped me with the interviews, and she was Russian. And but it did not matter. She also took some interviews without me being present. And they also said to her that I'm Dutch, you know, because I thought probably it's an interviewer bias because they wanted to do me a favor or whatsoever and say I'm German, but it was not. And so now I give you some example and show you the factors that had an impact on their identity formation. The first one is ancestry. One of our informants said, I am German. Of course, my parents were German people, weren't they? So he refers to his parents as German people, Deutsche Leute, and that's why he declared himself German. So the ancestry is very important. Another thing, what was important for them is mentality. And they reported different aspects, but one of them, of course, was the punctuality. Yeah? When I said, what do you feel like? What are you? And then the respondent said, well, I'm German. Would you say so? Well, I arrive punctually right on time at work. I have never been late. And this was, you know, his argument why he is a German. So again, and others, this is another interesting example because it also showed that for some speakers, the sense of belonging is considered something private and not negotiated openly. And this is really interesting, this example, because as you see, the respondent switched to Russian when she reported this. She said, well, of course, in my soul, I'm more German, of course. This is a second generation speaker. I'm German. I feel that I'm German in my soul in a way, and otherwise, when I go anywhere, nobody knows that I'm German. For her, it was important because she was married to a Russian, so she had also a Russian surname, no accent because second generation speaker. So for her, nobody noticed that she was German, but she said in my soul. And I was thinking, why did she switch to Russian? And I thought it's probably this concept of dusha, soul. This is something very Russian. So that she wanted to refer to this. It's also, yeah, we can also talk about it later if you like. Another factor is emotion, the emotional attachment. And this is a nice example from another second generation speaker who said, when I asked her, what would you say is your mother tongue? And she said, my mother tongue? That's an interesting question. in my heart lies German, in my head lies Russian. Yeah, so this is typical, a typical stereotype, of course, but you see that this is the emotional attachment is to German. And this woman is also an interesting person because she is what I also called a Riehl learner of German. She spoke only German when she was a child with her father, but then she moved elsewhere and she stopped speaking German. And then after 1990, when there was a possibility to attend German classes, she learned again standard German. So she doesn't speak Volga German anymore, but a kind of German interlanguage when she spoke with me. And this is also interesting. I was looking, for instance, on discourse markers, and a lot of Russian Germans in general, they use this what, probably you have seen what and etta and things like that. But these second generation, as the second language speakers, they don't use it. And they don't use Konechna or something. And she uses, for instance, natürlich the German translation, but in the context, you would normally use the Russian. So this is another interesting aspect. Okay, but let's move on to the fourth generation. Fourth generation speakers, of course, had not the experience to acquire German in a natural context, but they have, of course, a German heritage, and their grandparents still speak the language. So some of them reported that they hear it in the family sometimes, but some of them, like these girls here, they engage in activities like choirs, dance groups, etc. So they are active in this Wiedergeburt organizations. But when it comes to identity, they do not identify themselves as Germans. So I give you two examples. The first one said, this is the girl born in 1980, what are you? And she said, perhaps, or what do you feel like? Perhaps Russian. And I'm Orthodox, so I have a Russian mentality. So she refers to this fact that she has this Orthodox faith, that she has a Russian mentality. This is also an interesting connection. And the other girl said, I'm used to live here in Russia. That's a custom. But my mentality, I think, is closer to Europe. And this is also something that I found interesting, that she makes a point that the European mentality, actually, I think, is different from the Russian ones. So she wants to be European. And also, the others gave us similar examples. One just said, I'm a human being. But this is what happened to me also in other contexts, that bilinguals who could not decide I'm this or that, they, oh, I'm just a human being, and that's it. We do not differentiate between the different ethnicities or something. Okay, now I come to my last part. This is the identity formation after repatriation. And yeah, what is this repatriation? After 1990, there was a agreement between Putin and Kohl, and they said that the Russian Germans could repatriate. There were some, the possibility to repatriate also existed before, but there were only few German Russians going back to Germany, and they were called resettlers. And after 1930, they were called so-called Spätaussiedler, late resettlers. These are the Spätaussiedlers. And as you can see, they came in masses. Today, we have about 2.3 million Russian Germans, not only one, Russian, all Russian Germans, and their descendants in Germany. So this is a huge group. And they have a privileged status because soon at arrival, they were granted the German citizenship. And this is a big difference between other ethnic Russians or Russian Jews coming to Germany. And also other ethnic groups complain, thank you, that these Russian Germans are so privileged because they granted citizenship, and that's okay. Unfortunately, I have not done any research personally, but I refer to two studies. One is a study by Meng and Protasova that was also published in a volume I co-edited with another colleague from Ohio who studied also Russian Germans. And this study is interesting because Meng and Protasova interviewed Russian German speakers on arrival 20 years ago. And after 20 years, they took some interviews with 8 participants who were between 5 and 8 years old upon an arrival. And they found that these young Russian Germans keep their networks and feel more closely connected to other Russian Germans. So they reported that a friendship or relationship with Russian Germans is not problematic because they find the similarities in the family. So they have similar home furnishing. Yeah? They brought back from Russia, and this was not German anymore. Yeah. So the meals. Yeah? I don't know who showed this picture of this typical dish that it was good. Yeah, this was they saw this a German dish, but it was a Russian dish, and they brought all this kind of Russian dishes with them, and some rituals at family celebration. This was not German anymore, not German, Western Germany, and also their preferences for music completely different. So I have an example, an excerpt from an interview. Lisa, she said, I don't have a single friend who is really a German only. My best friend is also from Kazakhstan, so they came via Kazakhstan to Germany. I think that connects us. I guess when you are here, you're at her house, it's like in our house. There's nothing embarrassing on all these customs and culture and everything. If I go to a German friends, that's kind of a different world. Maybe not so much now, but I used, yeah, anyhow. Okay, and the other study is from Irwin, and she took 78 interviews with Russian Jewish and Russian German migrants. So this is an interesting comparison she made in 4 age group. And she found that despite tighter co-ethnic networks, the Russian German displayed clearer sample displayed signs of language shift. So language shift means from Russian to German. Also relaxed attitudes towards the L2, L1, sorry, loss among children. So for them, it was not important that they lose the Russian, the Russian Jewish. Yeah? They wanted to keep the Russian heritage language. But the Germans, the Russian Germans, they did not consider the Russian language so much the heritage language, although they all spoke Russian upon arrival, especially, of course, the younger generation. They did not speak German. But for them, it was a little bit different. And this was also interesting because they said for them, they have a neutral attitude towards language mixing. They said our language or our way to speak. So they always mix languages. So that was normal. And there was a higher percentage of mixed code than in the Jewish Russian sample. So for them, accepting German as an in-group code and promoting it among younger community members reflects also the fact that the German language had been an integral part of the community's identity. And I give you a last example, but really shows these hybrid identities. When asked, so do you feel German here? The respondent says, in Russia, I was not considering myself Russian. And here I don't feel German. It's hard to say what I am. I feel neither Russian nor German. What kind of German am I? I have so much Russian in me. And back there I thought, what kind of Russian am I? I have so much German in me. Now we are mixed. That's it. Okay, I think this is a very good example for the to finish. And this is what had been reported across the board by so many speakers I came across, Dutch and German. They always say, back home in Russia, we were Germans, and here in Germany, we are Russians. Okay, just to sum up, we have seen that Volga Germans who did not emigrate to the Americas in the 19th century had a very eventful history. This also had a consequence on language use. They kept speaking their dialects and maintained Volga German identity until the World War II, and then deportation and the new mixing of German from various regions led to a new dialect merger, formation of a particular canal. Speakers identified themselves as Deutsche still. Due to repression, language ban, language transmission is stopped in the third generation. Descendants speak Russian as first language and take on a Russian or more global identity, as we have seen. And on repatriation, the young Russian Germans became dominant in German, but maintained the Russian German identity. Okay, thank you so much.